Hello, how's it going? Galea here. Welcome to my 20-minute Windwalker Mythic Plus guide for patch 9.2.5. I'm making this guide as every video that I've managed to find on YouTube does a terrible job with the Windwalker AOE Opener, which is where most of your damage comes from in Mythic Plus, so I'm trying to correct that with this video here. If you are rerolling Windwalker, you might be interested in a series that I've got where I'm pushing from 0 to 3k Mythic Plus rating on a brand new 60 Windwalker ult, linked in the description down below. With all that being said, let's jump into the guide. For talents, these are the only talents you'll ever need. There are some players that use Spiritual Focus from the last row, but honestly, it's not worth it. Play with these talents anytime you're in a Mythic Plus. As for Covenants, Soulbinds and Conduits then, you will only ever be playing Necrolord, and 90% of the time you'll be playing Emily here. The other 10% you can play Plague Deviser Marilith, but this is only if you can get good use out of the immunity to crowd control. The best place to use Plague Deviser is for streets, where on the first boss you can use Fleshcraft to stop the containment cell cast. You could also use Plague Deviser in Plaguefall, where you can immunity the Shadow Ambush on third boss. Otherwise, you lose enough damage that Emily is the best choice. I personally always play with Emily. As for Conduits then, our potency Conduits are good enough that no matter what, we play triple potency, with Bone Marrow Hops, Calculated Strikes and Coordinated Offensive. They're a large portion of our damage in Mythic Plus, so you should always be playing triple potency. For our Endurance and Finesse Conduits then, I always play with Fortifying Ingredients, just because it makes Fortifying Brew that much more of a defensive. And I also always play with Dizzying Tumble, which is incredibly useful just for reducing the damage of the pack after you've used Leg Sweep. The only other thing to really mention is that you should never play with Lingering Numbness. That's because if you try and do a Ring of Peace and Paralysis skip, it will actually aggro the mob once the paralysis fades, causing you to ninja pull. Onto our Legendaries then. We will always be playing the same two Legendaries, that's Invokers and Unity. The only real choice that we have is where to craft the Legendaries. I'd highly recommend crafting your Legendaries in the Helmet Belt slots, as they give the largest amounts of stats. But say if you already have a good belt, you can also craft Unity in the boots or wrist slot. For a quick general overview of gear then, I just want to caveat this and say that you should always be trying to sim your gear and upgrades, and that what I'm about to mention is just a rough approximation of what's best for you. Having said that, our general stat priority for Mythic Plus is versatility and crit are our highest priority, with a small weighting towards versatility just because of the damage reduction side of the stat. After that, some mastery is fine and some haste is fine, but really we want to be trying to minimize haste as much as possible. On to our best trinkets then. You can use any combination of the four shown on screen here, including using double on use with both IQD and the first sigil. The only thing I'll really mention is that if possible, I'd always try and use IQD, as specifically for M+, it can be used very consistently without any of the downsides, and it is our best DPS trinket in terms of raw damage increase. For our enchants and consumables then, if you're using a two-hander, enchant with Celestial Guidance. If you're dual wielding, enchant with Sinful Revelation on the main hand and Celestial Guidance in the offhand. For rings, I would always enchant with Versatility, just because, as I mentioned before, the added benefit of the defensive aspect makes it our highest priority stat. And then for our chest enchant, go with Eternal Stats. For consumables, the only real choice you have is in food, and again, same with rings, I would go with Versatility. On to the most important thing then, how to top the damage meters. Before we get into the AOE Opener, I'd just like to mention that I'm not going to describe every single damaging Windwalker ability in detail. I'm assuming you know what each ability does. If you are very fresh to playing Monk, then I've linked to the wowhead Windwalker guide in the description below, which does detail all of our abilities if you're interested in that. On the screen now then is our approximate AOE Opener. The first three abilities, Tiger Palm, Chi Burst, are to get us to maximum Chi, but obviously if you are coming into a pack with max Chi, you won't need to cast those. Otherwise, the opener shouldn't change. The only proc which can change the opener is if we proc Bonedust Brew from our Unity Legendary during the opener, at which point we wouldn't cast our cooldown Bonedust Brew until the previous Bonedust Brew was over. I'd highly suggest keeping this video open or taking a screenshot of this frame and open it on a second monitor whilst you practice your AOE opener in this order. By far the hardest thing that I found as part of this opener is the Storm, Earth and Fire plus Rising Sun kick cast in the middle of the rotation. Because if you accidentally press your Storm, Earth and Fire ability twice, your images will focus on the same target and you won't be getting Mark of the Crane stacks from your Rising Sun kick and Tiger Palm casts. If you don't get 5 Mark of the Crane stacks, your AOE damage is essentially half of what it should be. For me, I found it really difficult to not double press Storm, Earth and Fire because I usually spam my buttons. So when I first started to play Windwalker, my images would always immediately focus the same target and my damage was awful. It's taken me time to practice this and I'd highly suggest you do the same and just practice this over and over again on target dummies. So let's take a quick look at how this opener plays out in slow motion. So my first 3 globals are to get me to max chi, so Tiger Palm, Chi Burst. I then press Zwen, Potion and Trinket. Next is Fists of Fury. Don't cancel Fists because of the damage. We then press Tiger Palm and Expel Harm into Storm, Earth and Fire and Rising Sun kick, which is the hard part. Tiger Palm again, Bonedust Brew, focus your images onto one target, Spinning Crane kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, Spinning Crane kick spam. We let our images hit different targets with the Rising Sun kick and Tiger Palm in the middle of the opener to get out as many marks of crane stacks as possible. We then focus them onto a single target to gain the benefit of coordinated strikes, which is a conduit which increases damage of your images if they're focused on the same target. If you don't get enough Chi procs, you will have to Tiger Palm to be able to continue Spinning Crane kick spam. Let's run that back from the top then at full speed. So first 3 globals are to get to max Chi, Tiger Palm, Chi Burst. We then Zwen, Fists of Fury, Expel Harm, Tiger Palm, Storm, Earth and Fire plus Rising Sun kick, Tiger Palm again, Bonedust Brew, Spinning Crane kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, Spinning Crane kick spam. So at the start of the guide I mentioned that most of the guides that I found don't give you the correct opener. So what version of the opener do they actually give you? They give you a very quick opener with almost no ramp, which is essentially Chi Burst, Zwen, Storm, Earth and Fire, Tiger Palm into Bonedust Brew and Spinning Crane kick spam. Now that does have a place, but the reason why this opener, certainly the reason why I think that this opener is much better, is because A, it gives you time to kill off relics. So what I mean by that is that you want relics to be dead before you start getting out your Marks of the Crane, because if you mark a relic and then it dies, you're not going to be at 5 stacks during the majority of your Spinning Crane kick spam. So having this slightly longer ramp with Fists of Fury at the start of the rotation, you will have 5 Marks of the Crane during all of your major damage. B, I also really like the longer ramp because it allows the tank to generate threat and make sure they are not getting a huge amount of snap aggro on the start of the pull. And C, this version of the opener has a significantly higher top damage. As long as all the mobs stay alive, it will have a higher top damage anyway, because you're getting a Whirling Dragon Punch into the middle of all of your major cooldowns essentially for free because of the way the Spinning Crane kick works and there being a delay between casts. So let's take a look over the AOE rotation then. So this is after you finished your opener, or maybe you don't have your cooldowns up in a normal pack within a Mythic Plus dungeon. So your highest priority then is to make sure you don't overcap Chi or energy. This basically means that if you're coming up to maximum energy, as long as you aren't going to overcap on Chi, you should be pressing Tiger Palm or Expel Harm here. After that, we should be pressing Whirling Dragon Punch on cooldown. Underneath that, we should be using up our Chi procs. The only thing to mention here is you cannot press Fists of Fury after a Chi proc because it will overwrite the last part of the damage. So if you've had a Chi proc, you either wait or you press a Tiger Palm in between Chi and Fist of Fury. After that, highest priority is Fist of Fury, then it's Chi Burst, then it's Rising Sun Kick, but this is only to enable Whirling Dragon Punch, so that means you should essentially be pressing Rising Sun Kick once every 20 seconds approximately. And then finally, we should be spending our Chi on Spinning Crane Kick, and if we don't have any Chi at this point, you would be pressing Tiger Palm. The important thing to note here is that this is for 3 targets and above. If you have only 2 targets, you should essentially be doing your single target rotation. Following that lovely segue then, let's have a look over our single target opener and rotation. So similarly with the AOE opener, first 4 globals here are to bring us to max Chi. So that's Chi Burst, Tiger Palm, Expel Harm, Tiger Palm, so that should bring us to 6 Chi. We then Zwen plus all of our potions and trinkets. Then Storm, Earth and Fire plus Bonedust Brew. We need to make sure if there's multiple targets here, say there's 2 targets on a fight, that we focus the Storm, Earth and Fires here so that they're focusing the same target. We then Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm, Fists of Fury, Whirling Dragon Punch, Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick times 3 with a final Rising Sun Kick. If we follow this opener, it makes sure that we get 2 Rising Sun Kicks into our Bonedust Brew, and we also get 3 Rising Sun Kicks into our Storm, Earth and Fire. Let's take a quick look at this opener in slow motion then. So, as we mentioned before, the first 4 globals are going to be to bring us to maximum Chi. So that's going to be Chi Burst, Tiger Palm, Expel Harm, Tiger Palm. Next we pop all of our cooldowns, so that's Swen, Potion, Trinket, into Storm, Earth and Fire and Bonedust Brew. We then Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm to make sure we're not going to hit maximum energy during Fists. We then Fists of Fury, Whirling Dragon Punch, Tiger Palm to make sure we don't hit maximum energy, Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm again to make sure we don't hit maximum energy. We then spam Blackout Kick 3 times, which lets us get the final Rising Sun Kick before the end of Storm, Earth and Fire. Let's run that back from the top then at full speed. So the first 4 globals are dedicated to getting maximum Chi, so that's Chi Burst, Tiger Palm, Expel Harm, Tiger Palm. We then pop all of our CDs, Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm, Fist of Fury, Whirling Dragon Punch, Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick spam, into a final Rising Sun Kick. So next let's move on to the single target priority order then. As with the AOE rotation, our highest priority is to make sure we're not overcapping on energy or Chi. So if we're coming up to maximum energy and we aren't going to overcap on Chi, we should be pressing Tiger Palm or Expel Harm. After that, we should be keeping our major CDs on cooldown, so that is Zwen, Bonedust Brew and Storm, Earth and Fire. The main thing to note here is that we should be trying to line up Storm, Earth and Fire with at least 1 other major cooldown, so that's either Bonedust Brew or Zwen. After that, we should be keeping Whirling Dragon Punch on CD, using up our Chi procs. Same thing to note here, we shouldn't be spending Chi and then immediately be pressing Fist of Fury, because that will override the very last part of the damage. After that, it's Rising Sun Kick, Fist of Fury into Expel Harm, Chi Burst, finally Blackout Kick, and then Tiger Palm. As long as you keep Whirling Dragon Punch, Rising Sun Kick, and Fist of Fury on cooldown, really your damage is going to be pretty much optimal. The only real nuance for Mythic Plus is that because encounters are usually pretty short, so between sort of 2 and 3 minutes for a boss fight, then it can definitely be worthwhile delaying Bonedust Brew and Storm, Earth and Fire to line up with Zwen, and also it can be worthwhile delaying Fists of Fury going into that window as well, so you basically get 2 openers within a boss fight rather than just pressing your buttons as they come off cooldown. So now that we know how to top the damage meters, let's have a look at Windwalker's defensive utility. We essentially have 4 major damage reductions, that is Touch of Karma, Diffuse Magic, Fortifying Brew, as well as Fleshcraft. Most classes, especially ones that aren't playing Necrolord, maybe get 2 DRs, so we have incredible survivability for M+, and we should be really trying to leverage that in every single key that we do. The best way of doing this is to stagger DRs rather than overlapping them. So that means roughly every 30 seconds we can be pressing a damage reduction. I typically go Touch of Karma into Diffuse, then Fleshcraft, then Fortifying Brew, and then we can start back at the beginning of the rotation. Fortifying Brew won't be back up at the end of that, but really that gives you sort of 3 to 3.5 minutes where you can be reducing damage, incoming damage, every single 30 seconds. Second to last then, which I actually think is probably the best aspect of Windwalker, is the mob control that the class brings. So Windwalker brings Sweep, which is an AoE stun, Ring of Peace, which is an AoE knock, as well as Paralysis, which is a single target stop. This is on top of Windwalker being a melee class, so obviously it already brings a shorter cooldown kick. How do we get the best out of all of this mob control and utility then? Depending on the pack, I play it slightly differently, so I try and group most packs into 2 separate groups. The first group is a set of maybe 5 ads with various high priority kicks in the group, and there aren't any stops. So I'm thinking about, say, the Gluttonous Ticks from Sanguine Depths and the set of trash in the first area of Sanguine Depths, where there aren't any high priority stops, but there are multiple casters in those packs which you want to try and stop every single cast. For these sorts of packs, I'm playing it similarly to the defensive utility, where I'm trying to stagger my abilities to get a second use out of them. So that would be doing, say, Kick into Paralysis, into Sweep, into Ring of Peace, into Kick again, and then hopefully Paralysis is back off cooldown, and then after that the pack is dead. You're also probably going to get off more kicks in that rotation, to be honest. You're probably going to get off 3 or 4 in that time. But that's the sort of general principle again of what I'm trying to do with the mob control and the mob utility that we have. For the second style of pack then, I'm thinking of, say, the Fishmancer packs in the Gambit first area with all the Murlocs. Here we have some really high priority stops. So for these sort of packs, I switch away from kicking and interrupting free casts into hyper focusing on these really high priority stops that are needed. So I will almost always try and incap or paralysis the first cast, then sweep the second cast, then paralysis the third cast, Ring of Peace the fourth cast, and paralysis the fifth cast. So you can, even if there's 2 of those mobs in there, you can hopefully manage to lock them completely down for sort of 30 to 40 seconds all by yourself. Just before we wrap up this guide then, let's have a quick look through some of the most useful weak auras and macros that I've found. So for tracking all of my abilities and cooldowns, I've used Afenar UI for monks, which I found absolutely ideal. The only thing that I've changed from this is I've moved the location of Expel Harm because it forms part of the core rotation for Windwalker, but other than that, it's pretty much perfect for using straight away. Another great set of weak auras that I found are for casting Diffuse Magic. One of the best aspects about Diffuse Magic is that it actually reflects the magic cast if it can do. So say for instance the trash in the other side, some of the trash will cast Shadowword Pain on you, which not only does it mean that you save the healer a dispel so they could dispel a hex, but you using Diffuse Magic on that Shadowword Pain also reflects the damage and increases your damage on that pack. So there's a weak aura that basically tracks all of these spells, and anytime that it's cast on you, it then gives you a prompt to press Diffuse Magic and reflect the cast back onto the mobs. Finally then, the last weak aura that I found really useful for Windwalker is it's 2 weak auras actually, one that highlights diseases and another highlights poisons on your party frames, so you know when there is, say, a disease that you can dispel for the group. For macros then, I actually don't use many macros. I know there's some players that macro in Rising Sun Kick with Storm, Earth and Fire, as well as Bonedust Brew within Storm, Earth and Fire, and have 2 separate abilities. But I just like the flexibility to have it as its own button. So I don't do that, but that's something to mention and you could have a look at if you would like to. The only macro that I actually use is to cast Bonedust Brew at my cursor, which just saves me a mouse click in the middle of the opener, which I find very useful. For all of the weak auras and macros that I've just mentioned, I've left a link in the description down below. Closing thoughts for this guide then. I genuinely think that Windwalker is probably the best, or at least one of the best specs at the minute for pushing keys, specifically in a pug environment where, because you bring such good defensive utility as well as mob control, you can really make sure that these keys are going smoothly. If you've liked the guide, please just let me know in the comments down below. Leave me any feedback if you haven't liked it, anything you think that I can improve on. But yeah, I hope you have enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in some of my other videos.